Hey people, I've just watched a video which I'm going to quote. It's called Sweden's Correctional System, and this has been uploaded by Daniel Hammerberg. I've just watched that video, which is uploaded in 2009, so I should say it's 3 years old, but I imagine some of the issues are still very relevant. I have to say, if everything in this video is accurate, I am utterly astonished. Now, I always knew Sweden's got a reputation for leniency and a soft justice system, but this is quite staggering if you watch this video. Firstly, the so-called cells really, they look like student accommodation. There's no bars in the window, there's plants, there's books, there's shelves, there's a TV. The beds are fairly comfortable, very clean. From the outside, they just look like large cottages. I believe the closed prisons have an extra fence, which sort of makes them look like a school. I was staggered going through this video, if it's accurate. But quite honestly, it wouldn't surprise me if it was. And somewhere between shock and I want to laugh. Although there's nothing funny here. When we're talking about crime, that impacts lives. And I'd like to just critique the Swedish justice system a little, because one thing I'd like to point out with the Scandinavian mentality, and I'm broadening that a bit because I believe Norway is quite similar. I don't know much about the Danish and Finnish justice system, so I can't comment too much on them, but I believe Norway is somewhat similar. From what I gather, the entire focus on the Scandinavian justice system is about reducing crime. Now, I believe that is one of the pillars of justice. It's one of the areas that needs to be looked at. And it is true that generally Scandinavian countries do not have particularly high crime levels. It's probably fair to say they're quite low crime levels. I can't quote the exact statistics, so I'm not going to do that. But it's clear that they're quite safe societies, generally speaking. That's good. Okay, that's a fact that has to be welcomed. But what I really, really reject here is the notion that that alone is an important factor, or that alone is the only aspect to this. What I cannot comprehend is the Swedish attitude to crime and punishment. And that is to say that it seems to me, in the Swedish justice system, there's simply no philosophy that criminals should be punished. They should have to face up to the crimes they've committed. The entire makeup seems to be about giving them opportunities, for education, for leisure, for developing themselves, etc. There's absolutely no emphasis, if this video is accurate, on actual justice, that is, being punished for the crime they commit. Now, punishment seems to be a dirty word in Swedish culture. And to me, from what I gather, and I admit I don't know the system 100%, but I have a fairly good interpretation, and not just based on this video. I've read into legal cases in Sweden in the past, and to me, this is extreme liberalism at its worst. There's often a claim that Sweden's the world's best country. I think that's a dubious claim. If I was a victim of crime in Sweden, I would be more than a little pissed off. Because the issue isn't just about reducing crime levels, although that is very important. It's also making sure that criminals face up to what they have done. And these prisons, I can't comprehend that. I mean, to me, when it comes to justice, I see two extremes. On one hand, you have authoritarian regimes, which have hellhole prisons, which use torture, which are really, really brutal, and there's many examples in Africa and Asia. I certainly wouldn't like to spend one day in a Chinese prison, for instance, or a Thai prison. Then you have the American system, which is very, very hardline, prison uniforms, etc. Now, those systems, in my opinion, are a failure, on the grounds that they're dehumanizing, especially in countries with one-party regimes and so on, which have a reputation for jailing political dissidents. They're a failure because they are simply inhumane. And actually, certainly in the case of the United States, they do absolutely nothing to reduce crime, because the United States still has very high crime levels. So clearly they're not working in that regard. The US, shamefully, has the world's highest prison population. And it has a huge problem with prison gangs, etc., etc. So that is proof that the tough-only approach is not workable. But, and this is a big but, I think the Swedish approach is the other extreme, which is extreme leniency. I mean, basically in this video, Daniel Hammarberg was quoting sort of blogs, I guess it was, from inmates or ex-inmates, where they choose which institution they can go to, and they compare notes and complain that their institution doesn't have enough TVs, and this is quite staggering. It's not that I think everything about the system is bad. I think there is a case to be had for educating prisoners, explaining the errors of the ways and that sort of thing. That's fine. But this is just extreme. This is simply treating criminals as if they have not committed a crime, as if they're somehow not responsible for what they have done. It's laughable, and not in a good way. If I was a victim of crime in Sweden, if I'd had a close person to me murdered or something, and I found out that the person responsible was living this sort of life, I think that would be intolerable. And I do wonder how Swedish victims of crime feel about this. I've seen a lot of videos from people who denounce it. I've seen other Swedes condone it. Personally, I think it's extreme liberalism, because there's absolutely no punishment involved whatsoever, or at least very minimal punishment. I honestly would say, job centres in the UK are more soul destroying than these places, and that's quite a statement. Anyway, talking about the Swedish justice system, I'll make a brief little statement here about what I think justice should be. I want something in the middle. I do not want to see American-style prisons, which are, in my opinion, too brutal. They have gang cultures. They don't reduce crime levels, and they're highly questionable all around. Arguably, they're universities for criminals who actually learn more. And British prisons are also far from perfect in that regard. But I absolutely do not want to see a situation where people who have been convicted of crimes, which in many cases have destroyed lives. I mean, there was one quotation this guy made that there was one prison in Sweden, a court ruled that the prison had basically banned pornography for convicted rapists. This is ironic, actually, given Sweden's reputation for radical feminism. This would seem to be the exact opposite, but the court argued, or overturned, basically the prison's decision to ban pornography for convicted rapists. What the hell? If that's true, that's very disturbing, that this court would actually think it fit They gave convicted rapists pornography. And this in the land of the feminists, that's quite ironic. But a quick word basically about what I think ideal prison should be. Firstly, I don't think you can ever have a perfect system. Crime will always exist, and I don't really believe that any prison can be absolutely perfect. What prison should be is humane. You can't have a hellhole prison, because that will just make the inmates far more bitter, far more vengeful against society, and they could come out and commit an even worse crime if they don't have a whole life tariff. It doesn't help anyone. It brutalises society, and it's simply revenge if you have extreme human rights abuses. So they should be humane. Now, what do I mean by humane? I believe that inmates should have some basic opportunities. They should have opportunities to reform, access to education. In order to reform, they should have exercise, sufficient exercise, and perhaps limited leisure activities. I don't agree with those people who say there should be absolutely nothing, like no TVs, nothing. I don't agree with that. I think there should be limited leisure facilities. But prison has to be prison. You cannot have a situation where inmates are having a lifestyle which is almost indistinguishable from life outside. And that's what the Swedish system seems to be. And that to me is just odious. Prison has to be tough. I do believe there should be hard manual labour for inmates. I believe, for example, in pragmatic labour. For example, in the case of less violent inmates, they should be made to clean up flood damage. That's pragmatic. It's putting them to use, and it's making them feel that they're actually contributing to society. They're giving something back to society, and that's a step up from a community sentence, because they will still be under custodial sentences. There should be, in terms of cost, how much it costs to house an inmate and so on, that should be evaluated. The Swedish costs, from what I understand, the comparisons of video are much higher than the US or the UK. Costs should be low, but not at the price of depriving the inmate of basic human rights. And I don't scoff at the issue of human rights. I do think societies, developed countries, should be setting an example. So I don't believe in hellhole prisons. I believe in tough prisons, though, and that does mean taking away some liberties. For example, I don't think prisons should have the right to vote. I don't think they should have some of the leisure facilities that law-abiding citizens have. Why should they? If someone has chosen to commit a crime, they should have to face penalties, and that means certain liberties being taken away. If you violate someone else's liberty, then you should not be able to enjoy that full liberty yourself. However, there should be basic opportunities like education facilities, drug rehabilitation programs, that sort of thing, and victim empathy programs, so that in cases where maybe the inmate is genuinely of low intelligence or whatever, they should be, or if they've shown no remorse when convicted, they should be made to think twice, and they should be basically shown what their victim has went through. They should have access to visitors, medical care, etc., etc. But basically, prison should not resemble life on the outside. Now, we have an organisation in the UK called the Hard League for Penal Reform. I prefer to call them the Hard League for Penal Abolition, because I believe that is their ultimate goal. I believe they're a dangerous organisation, because if they had their way, there would be no prisons whatsoever. To me, the issue is not about prison numbers, it's about how effective prison can be. At the moment in the UK, we can improve greatly. Our system remains deeply disproportionate, where you have cases of people escaping on far too lenient sentences when they should be in jail, or in some cases their custodial sentences are far too soft in light of the crime they've committed. And then you have other cases where the sentence is arguably excessive. We need a serious review into that. I would argue that the sentencing committee has to be a lot more accountable. Organisations like the Hard League for Penal Reform, which is a criminal apologist organisation, an anti-punishment organisation, should have far less influence, and victims should come first. It's as simple as that. Like I say, you can never have a perfect system, but I see two extremes. And the ideal system, in my opinion, has to be somewhere in the middle. That's it. And I think the Swedish justice system is a joke, because it just negates the fairness of punishment.